While we wait for Ezra, I'll introduce our guest moderator and our other guest as well. We have Professor Dalia Wasner, and we have Heidi Paster Harf, who, if you guys want to join on stage, we can maybe get the conversation starting? I don't know. Here.
Or should we share the mic?
Yeah, there should be one mic here and then another actually over here. So. Oh, back here.
We're here.
Hey.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Are you able to hear me all right?
Yes. Okay.
Great. Sorry. I'll explain later.
No, that's all right. Can you hear me as well? Okay, wonderful. So
Yes.
It's a pleasure to be back for the Boston Jewish Film Festival. My name is Dalia Wasner, and I direct a program at Brandeis University called the Jews of the Americas. So I've been working with Boston Jewish film for a long, long time, and it's a pleasure now to get to be part of the conversation of this beautiful movie. Congratulations both to Heidi and, of course, to Ezra. It's so nice to meet you in person and Ezra virtually. But I think we cut you off, Ezra. Were you going to say something?
Oh, I just wanted to say apologies for, I'm out in the street. I'm in Brazil covering the COP30 summit, UN summit, and doing a lot of recording around town and filming. So I just got finished walking 15 kilometers exploring the river of Sao Paulo, the Pinheiros River, which is quite something. So apologies for being in the street if the signal's spotty.
Wow, it's amazing the important work that you're doing that also takes you to real beauty in South America. Okay, so I think we'll get started with a question for both of you, which is really just a curiosity to know how you both came to the project. My understanding is that Heidi really approached it as a photographer and that you came to know her work and the film developed from that. So maybe let's hand it over to, is it Heidi or Heidi? Heidi is right.
Depends where you are.
Okay. So Heidi, do you want to talk to us? I know that you lived in Colombia for over 2 decades. You've been photographing the Jewish community that's depicted here for 15 years. So,
well, not quite 15. I think I met them in 2016. The community's when I met them was very young.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, but I was photographing the traditional Jewish community.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you came to the Beit David community.
Well, originally it was Magen Avraham or Shomer Israel. They switched around quite a bit, and then the offshoot, Isska and Menajem, when we started filming, had moved to Beit David.
Okay.
But the story starts is I was in a taxi cab taking my daughter to the synagogue with a friend of hers, and this was probably in about 2014, and around then, yeah. No, probably, or maybe earlier. And the taxi driver asked if you needed to be Jewish to go to the synagogue. And at that moment, I was kind of speechless. I didn't quite know how to answer. I was always told to maintain a low profile, not tell too much about myself, or, admit that I was a foreigner, I could get kidnapped. So I was kind of like hesitant to answer. And I said, well, I don't know. My daughter's friend isn't Jewish and she's going in. And as we got to the synagogue, he pulled over and he took off his baseball cap and these long payas came down. And he said, I'm Jewish and I put on tefillin every day. And I said, oh my God, what is going on? So I was like, okay, good luck. And I ran into the synagogue and I was like, what is happening? And they said, oh, don't pay attention to him. There's a whole movement of Jews for Jesus. And he was pretty much dismissed. But I started noticing, every now and then, other Colombians clad in Orthodox garb, and it caught my eye, and I started thinking, what is happening here? And then one day I opened the newspaper, and I saw that Comunidad Magen Avraham was receiving its first Torah. So this must have been like 2015-16. And then I went over to, or maybe a little earlier, who knows, I can't remember anymore. And I went to the synagogue and I said, what is this? And they said, oh yeah, so these are churches that have converted to Judaism. And I said, well, do you have a number? Can I call someone? I'm really curious. And they gave me somebody to call. And I called, I said, can I just, I said, I'm photographing the Jewish community of Cali. Can I come and maybe photograph you? And they said I could show up. And when I did, they weren't just receiving their first Torah, it was a mass conversion. And at that moment, my jaw dropped, and I said, wow. And I was just kept going back because I was very, very curious. And that's where I met Isska and Menajem.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Maybe I'll stand a little farther, so that might help am I still lit so people can see and Ezra can see? Okay. Wonderful. So I think that for me, when I was watching the film, I think that the artistry of the photography still shows through, even though obviously this is a film and not still photographs. I know you've written about the photography project as, that standalone project even before coming to film. And my understanding is that Ezra came across one of your photographs and he really wanted to dig deeper. Ezra, is that correct? Do you want to tell that story?
Yeah, so I know Heidi through what's called the Bolivar crowd in Cali, and we started having lunch together, and I was really excited to meet another Jew in Cali. I think at that time, this was right before the pandemic, so I would have been living in Cali at that point, maybe 2.5 years. And, Jews are very rare in Cali, and it's a very small, tight-knit, very conservative community. I'm a very outlandish, eccentric, queer eccentric, so I wouldn't say I fit in very much in the local Jewish community of Cali, Colombia. So when I met Heidi, who was from Brooklyn, and so much fun, we really clicked, we started having these great lunches, and I had grown up in rural Oregon, so very few, maybe like 2 or 3 very secular Jewish families, artsy, rural hippie Jews who were doing the back to the land type thing out west. And so I had a lot of questions about Judaism for Heidi because I hadn't grown up with any contact to, the formal religion. My mom was like the rabbina of the village who tried to gather everyone for high holidays and whatnot. So I definitely had a personal, very Jewish upbringing in my home, but it was very kind of mystical and much more interpretive than, a formal synagogue. And Heidi had the opposite kind of upbringing. So I could really ask her about the ins and outs of Judaism. And in those lunches, Heidi brings out this photography project, and I got goosebumps immediately when I saw these images. I mean, it was like all of the worlds that define me converging in a series of photographs. These looked like Sephardic or Mizrahi Jews from Aleppo several centuries ago, where some of my ancestors are from. And so it was like traveling in time because they would have been, much more religious than the future generations of my family. And so I think when you have that kind of moment as an artist, you're kind of living for that moment of getting goosebumps and especially reacting to somebody else's work in that way. So you just kind of know that you want to do that collaboration. And so I was like, wow, Heidi is an incredible artist. And these photos are already so cinematic, so intersectional, because, you have these Colombians, some of them are Afro-Colombians from the Pacific Coast, the Moray in the Beit Aviv community was from Buenaventura. I'm not going to go into a whole Buenaventura rant, but if you're interested in doing more research, look up Buenaventura. It is, it's like a little Nigeria here, or I'm not here, I'm in Sao Paulo right now, but it's just over the mountains from Cali. There's still communities that speak Yoruba dialect. They have the, Orisha, so religion, aspects of that religion, the very syncretic religion over there. Anyway, so you have people like that, the Moray, who's from that lineage, let's say, in Buenaventura, who is on the route to becoming a rabbi, an Orthodox rabbi. So it's a really wild kind of convergence. And then you have Menajem, who's very indigenous, and he's grown up in this guerrilla territory on a farm that is bombed by the military. So it's this very intensely intersectional story that it was immediately just like, wow, this is cinema. And I really wanted, my partner and I, David, we really wanted to get into filmmaking with our company, Dystopia. So it was just like a really natural marriage between Uncaged Productions, Heidi's company, and Dystopia. And we just knew that this project was going to be really stimulating and provoke a lot of deep questions about what it means to be a Jew.
So beautiful to hear. So I have a question actually about, this being a documentary film. I'm a historian by training, and I've recently been very interested in oral history as a discipline. How does one receive authentic stories that yet one is in some way guiding, right? There are certain questions that the interviewer or the subject is responding to tell their own story. And so I think that one thing that I was struck by with the documentary is the deep respect that is given to, even though the lens is from collaborators that maybe are not from these communities, that you still have spent time, that there's an appreciation for their own narrative. And I also understand that some of the talent was sourced also for the movie in Colombia. So I wonder if you can talk to sort of your own awareness of kind of the trust that goes into receiving this story and helping to tell a story that is not yours.
Well, I'll start and then let Ezra finish. I think when you make a film or you do a documentary, the first thing is access. And that, like you said, that comes with trust. And I think you also have to, when you go into it, you really can't be selfish and say, well, my end goal is this. And that would just defeat the whole purpose. So when I met Isska and Menajem, which was that night of when they received the Torah and the mass conversion, they were not getting converted that night. They had already had 2 conversions, I believe, at that point. They were just so eager for me to tell their story, and I was so eager to learn. And they were they were how I was able to get into the community. And they'd call me up and they'd say, "You can come," and then they'd maybe call me back 10 minutes later. "Sorry, changed our mind. You can't come." So there was a lot of back and forth, but I think there was a lot of consistency, honesty. Just in answering each other's questions and listening to each other. And when I first met Isska and I proposed the idea, the first day at her house when she showed me 2 of her conversion papers, I said, "How would you feel about being photographed?" And she said, I don't have a problem with it. I'd really like to make a movie one day, she said. I said, "Well, do that." Who knew? Who knew? And so when Ezra and I went over to her house, right before right after the pandemic, I think it was 2021, like in about maybe March of 2021, February. We went in and Ezra was just as curious as I was. We were just like, what is, I was curious, where are they gonna go? Where, this is their story, where's their future gonna take them? And Ezra came in with his own curiosity, and I think it was just being open to their stories and not having any agenda to direct it in any particular way.
And Ezra, I'm curious to hear your answer and maybe add, as you're pondering, Heidi is obviously a beautiful photographer, and I understand that your background is in filmmaking, also music, right? So does that background that you have, how did that play into telling of the story? When I watched it first and then again, I think, the music within the film is its own character, I think.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna cover local talent, the photography, and the music. So first of all, obviously the local talent that we first meet is the community that Heidi introduces me to, and the first place I go is Isska and Menajem's house. And so where I grew up in Oregon, small cowboy town, deep red at that time, Bush years and then later Trump years, and a big Mormon community, maybe 7 Mormon words in a town of 12,000 people, and so many, countless Christian evangelical churches. And let's just say, they do not like the gays. So my kind of preconception about anyone who had been an evangelical Christian, also the Christian right, the evangelical Christian right in Colombia, had single-handedly taken down the peace referendum in 2016 by somehow managing to claim that the peace process was an attempt to turn Colombian children gay. I still don't know how they managed to get that one in the bag, but they did. And Colombia actually voted no on peace. And President Santos did basically a presidential move to pass peace through Congress and ignored the referendum result. So I had a lot of preconceptions about what evangelical Christians and evangelical Christian Colombians were going to be like. My stepmother's also an evangelical Christian, was not okay with the gay theme for a good 20 years. So, I was very nervous going into this community that they were going to figure out, that I was gay, because they were very prying. They were ready to marry me off to many of those eligible young ladies that they're so keen and eager. There's even like a mail order bride service that somebody in the community set up to ship off Colombian girls to Israel. I don't think it's thriving, but it's definitely an intention. So, this is a really delicate environment to be going into. Also, El Guaval, where we were filming, that is like a drug trade hotbed. So, sometimes I'm wondering, this is a great front or anyway. So, not to make any. I hope this is being recorded. That wasn't a good thing to say, but anyway. So. I hope that I'll get back on track.
I'm just going to bring you back on Lane. Why don't you tell us about the sound guy who, when we were filming outside?
Yeah, exactly.
That's where I want to go.
Yeah. So basically, just to contextualize the barrio, because it's very deep Cali barrio, and so we were really scared about having all this equipment out in the street, and this little kid comes up to me, a teenager, and in Cali, that's the person you need to really be looking out for, is the skinny, 13 to 15-year-old. When you're alone in the street, they're gonna whip out a knife and take what you have. So he walks up to me, and I'm like, oh God, here it was. And he's like, I am a self-taught filmmaker. He lived across the street from the More. I'm a self-taught filmmaker, and I want to share my Instagram. And he was like, he's amazing. He started working with us on the film, doing all of these roles as a 17-year-old, and now he's one of the top talents in Colombia. He gets flown to Spain to do music videos for Alejandro Sanz. And Sebastián Valenzuela is just a testament to what these kids do with YouTube. It's all being self-taught on tutorials on YouTube, and they become industry professionals and incredible creativity and talent. And then I know I'm extending. So then, we get into the shoot, and Isska and Menajem, it turns out, are incredibly progressive people. So they might be Orthodox Jews, wanting to move to occupied territories and live in settlements. But in Colombia, they're staunch supporters of the peace process, staunch supporters of the national uprising of 2021, very open-minded about gay topics. Isska loved Judaism because we could talk freely about sex. So we really bonded over that and the kind of the joys that one can have as a Jew, the joys of Shabbat and, of the home and whatnot. And it turned out when we were filming the mikvah scene that Isska, she was mic'd, and I was recording sound that day, and I was listening to Isska through the headphone. I could hear her through the headphones, and she was praying to herself, but she was singing, and she was singing Psalm 23. And I was like, and Isska in a Discovery interview had mentioned that she had been a rock singer, and everybody's been a rock singer in Cali, so you're just kind of like, okay. And the voice, it was this incredible professional, but super unique voice. And I was like, this is going to be the most incredible process, because we're going to be able to put the story of Isska as a singer and kind of also her confrontation with singing in public as an Orthodox woman kind of at the heart of this film. And that's what she decides to do. She says, fuck it, I'm singing. And Menahem's like, do it. You've always pushed the envelope. And it's like, yes, that is the example of Jewish women that I grew up with, who push the envelope, who don't bow down, and it's not about being submissive. And that's a big misinterpretation of Judaism in my point of view.
Awesome. Okay.
We have, I think we'll end sort of our leading of the conversation now, so we make sure we have time for some audience questions for any of us. I guess the floor is open. Should they just stand up and...
Do you want to repeat the question?
Okay, all right. If you can say the question, I'll repeat it to the mic. Yes.
Oh, I thought it was stunning. Absolutely. I had no idea what it was going to be. And when you started talking, I didn't know who, producer, I didn't know who the roles are or anything. I thought it was
so smooth, and the music really just moved it along. You know, and I connect to a lot of those little things, to rural Oregon. You know, my daughter lived there, and I've been to Colombia and the traditional Jewish community and to Israel, so I have my perspective, and this I thought was absolutely, I don't even have a question. My question was, who was behind the camera? I mean, there was nobody there. I just kept thinking, there's nobody filming this. This is just there in these people's lives.
Wow.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, who has a question?
Wow.
That's a question?
Can you just speak for a minute as to why they didn't get into Israel? That was not so.
Okay.
Speak for a minute as to why they weren't in Israel.
Okay, a quick minute. So in Judaism in Colombia is centralized, and their conversions were not kosher. In order to have an Orthodox conversion in Colombia, it needs to be done outside of Colombia. And in order to make Aliyah, you need to be a member of one of the traditional Jewish communities. And in order to be part of one of the traditional Jewish communities, you have to have a kosher conversion. So they're in this conundrum where they can't quite get that for money to go abroad to get it. It's very expensive. At the end, why they weren't allowed in Israel is because Israel, like most other Western countries, have very strict immigration policies. And they were trying to deceive them. They thought they were going to outsmart them, I believe. Of course, we're all rooting for Isska and Menajem. We fall in love with them. We want them to get in. We see their determination and their passion for Judaism, but the immigration agents don't see that. And that's why they weren't let in. Also, it's important to note that there are many people in Colombia who have had conversions and did make it to Israel. And in 2018, they stopped all immigration from Colombia, so made it very difficult. What's that? Oh, and they made it. Made it extremely difficult. So even if you were a member of the traditional Jewish community, in order to make it to Israel, they put you through many hoops.
All right, so this one in the middle right here. Here, no, here you go. You know, only because it's easier for him to hear. Okay.
Yeah, I'm curious about when and why Menajem, when in his life, and what was the what prompted him to be interested in Judaism and convert to Judaism.
Okay, so what I picked up when I was working with them for a long time is that they have gone through many different religions, and this is a common theme among many of the converts. Colombia is a very Catholic country. This one particular way of thinking, this is how you do it. So they're looking for other answers. They're trying to explore, and Ezra, I'm sure, will have some comments on this as well, is that I believe it's a country with a lost identity. It's a country where, the indigenous people are not practicing their indigenous religion. And then you have the blend, and then you also have the violence that are pushing people away from their communities into bigger cities. So they're not connected to their roots, and they're kind of this lost, and they're looking for answers. You probably have some answers here too as well, and I'd love to hear them.
Yes, but not about Menachem's story in particular. I don't know what brought him in. And my sense from watching the film for him wasn't it Isska who brought him in?
The opposite.
Oh.
So actually, sorry. So can I just give a little context here? Because I actually became a Colombian citizen this year, and to get citizenship, you have to take a very difficult citizenship exam. And you read Colombian history and you realize that from before contact with Europeans, Colombian society was in absolute free fall from pandemics that other indigenous people who had contact with were spreading. And so the Spaniards arrived in absolute, already pretty difficult conditions, and then obviously made things way worse. But it's been cycles of war. There hasn't been any period of peace in Colombia ever. Even after 2016, peace never happened. So it's a very war-torn territory for the last 500 plus years. And, in recent decades, in the last 50 years, the United States has been waging an insane proxy war in Colombia. supposedly against cocaine cartels, but we all know that, it does absolutely nothing to stem the flow of cocaine around the world, that it's a very corrupt system, and it foments an insane amount of violence in the Colombian countryside. I think it's something like 500,000 Colombians who have been murdered, civilians, in the last, I think, 30 years. And Menajem grew up in that crossfire. He grew up in a coca-growing region in the department of Meta, and he talks about that in his introduction interview when he's baking challah. And, his family was accused of being guerrilla sympathizers, and like many campesinos who were progressive, who had a more, very kibbutz kind of philosophy about life, they were accused of being guerrilla sympathizers and targeted by this U.S.-backed military campaign, and that means warplanes and helicopters flying over your finca and bombing it. And Menahem's dad was not as kind of into that scene as his mother was, so his dad fled the farm from Meta and they ended up in the Cauca Valley. It's very far where Cali is from, where Menajem grew up. And they fled there, and he got really into drugs and was sleeping on the park bench. And it was in a village near Cali called Restrepo. And that village was under right-wing paramilitary control. And so Menajem ended up on a hit list because they would do social cleansing campaigns at that time. This would have been, I guess, in the 90s. And Menajem was on that list for termination, because they would execute the weed smokers who were in the park. And so he fled that and ended up in a Christian church, and that's where he really started finding meaning and structure, and it really saved his life, and started really taking religion seriously. And in that reading of the Bible kind of comes to Judaism.
Thank you so much, Ezra. That was so meaningful, and I'm happy to also answer questions about the history of Jews in Colombia throughout the centuries since contact and beyond. I'm told that we have a very strict stop right now at 4:45, so unfortunately I think we need to exit the room. But clearly I am with a room full of fans of your beautiful work together, so congratulations on your film.
Thank you.
If you want to ask me a question outside, more than happy to answer it. Okay.
Thank you all so much. Have a great night. Thank you, Heidi. Thank you, Dalia. Thank you, Ezra. We're signing off for tonight. Just one shout out.